Hey friends. So the other day I made a little video showing you this thing that I was working on, which was a spreadsheet of various sources and their approach to um, uh, basically the numerology of the minor arcana, the numerology of tarot. Um, and just for the sake, since I'm looking at it, I'll kind of go through that quickly. I looked at the open reading by Yoav Ben-Dov, The Way of the Tarot by Alejandro Jodorowsky, and then with a couple online sites. Um, so Tarot the Royal Road, Biddy Tarot, the Sandra article, I can't remember the name of the website, but Angel Paths. And then I looked at a numerology site as well, just to get a sense. And then, so after I kind of compiled all of that, what I did myself was I went and looked at common themes or things that felt like they belonged, or things that felt right and felt interesting. And I sort of distilled um, as much of the, well, not as much of, I tried to distill all of these into just a few keywords. And one of the things I noticed is that as the number gets larger, up until about 8 or 9, the descriptions get longer. The number seems to get more complex, which I guess makes sense. So I looked at all these sources, and basically what I was looking at was themes. And then this next phase was to kind of take my distillation um, from those many different sources, um, and then apply them to each of the suits. So, for example, if one is about potential, if it's about the seed of something, the act of consumption, etc., what does that look like in each suit? But the other thing that I wanted to do was look at it from more than just a place of, well, so for the most part, the numbers are generally pretty like positive to neutral, right? So, um, in distilling them, what I discovered was that one is about potential. There's a sense of wholeness there, although that wasn't something I necessarily focused on in my interpretations as I went through. Creation, conception, things starting to take form, etc. Two was about duality and opposing forces, balance, harmony. Like nothing in them were particularly negative. Um, when we get into 4, we start to get into a slight bit of conservatism and stubbornness. 5 and sort of 7-ish, 9-ish. Like there were some numbers, but maybe like only 5 really sort of actively. Um, even like 9 wasn't super, like 9 was a bit negative, but like 5 was the most negative. But really the only one that was sort of negative at all, everything, and I'm using the word negative kind of generically, um, but that reflected the struggles um, of life rather than just kind of the love, the loveliness. Um, So what I decided to do rather than just have 5, be the unpleasant number, was go through and filter the distillation of the number's energy through the lens of each suit, but further through the polarity of light and shadow. So it wasn't just looking at the number and the suit. It was about what does this number look like in its best, and what does it look like um, in its negation or its more negative um, quality. So because we know that tarot sort of explores both of those things, and not everything is nice. And one of the difficulties, of course, is especially when you're reading for yourself, is to find that balance and not to focus too much on either the negative or the positive. Um, so that was one thing, and the other thing was also, and I actively tried to do this. I didn't always succeed, but the other thing that I wanted to do was, like, I wanted the shadow to not necessarily be the opposite of, like, oftentimes when we're learning, and I use we again kind of generically, when I was learning, I don't know if I was sort of if I was taught this, or if I absorbed it, or if it was just something that I came to the conclusion of. But the shadow aspect, or at the time, at that point, the reversed aspect, was like the opposite. So if the card was upright and it was a traditionally positive card, its reversal was the negation of that, or the negative aspect of that. What I tried to do in this case was not that, actually, but think about this essence of the number, and then what does that look like in its best, and what does that same thing look like in a negative, or in a shadow aspect. So if we look, for example, at um the distillation for number one, right, for the aces, what I kind of culled from this larger list here was potential, completeness, seed, creation, conception, ambition, raw energy, taking form, initial emanation, impulse, progress, initiation, independence. So these were kind of the major themes. And sort of potential, creation, conception, seed, those were like the strongest ones for me. And just in researching and listening to people talk and stuff, that felt pretty common. So um to filter it through the energy of wands, for me, wands are really about passion projects, vocations, life's work, life's mission, the thing we're passionate about, the things we want to do, the things that make us whole, um, the things that kind of light our fire. Uh, and from my own perception in my own work, that's traditionally like creative work, or just sort of the work we do in our jobs that really excites us. But it can also be our passions and our desires and such. Although my base layer for the wand suit is really creativity and passion work that way. So potential, completeness. Also, what does this look like if I'm filtering it through wands and its most positive, through fire and its most positive? The start of passion projects, sparks of ideas, first drafts, testing the waters, kind of lusty, lustful attractions. Sometimes spurts of output, like little bits of attempts at something, the first steps on a job plan or adventure, right? So that's it at its lightest. That's how I sort of filtered this idea of potential and seed and conception through the lens of wands. But the shadow isn't necessarily like the end of passion projects, or the end of ideas, or the absence of ideas. What is the negation, um the negative of this? It's not the opposite. It's how does this energy um become a negative in our lives, or a problem in our lives. So in that case, I started thinking about it as, um if the attraction is kind of fun in its light aspect, then it's kind of thoughtless, or maybe not as well thought out. Or it's an accidental spark. It was, the light is a spark that we meant to light. This is a spark that we didn't mean to light. Um, an overzealous beginning rather than a ready beginning. And then I did get into a little bit of the negative, so stalled initiative, dependence, fear, failure. But and as I go through this, there are some oppositions, but I wanted to really think about the actual energy of the number, and not look at the shadow as the opposite of it, but where does that energy become negative? um so, like, in water, like initial attraction, the denial of attraction, um the disconnection, or shyness, self-sabotage. I tried to sort of filter everything through in a way that didn't necessarily oppose the initial meaning, but that gave it a negative. Um, for air and swords, I talked about new ideas and thoughts as the light aspect, and the shadow. It says here, like in Coet thought, like unformed thought. Um, so that's how I tried to filter it. And again, this is probably something I'll likely tinker with and play with over time. Um, but I also did that for the cards that, or not the cards rather, but the numbers that are more traditionally unpleasant. So if 5 is disruption of stability, upheaval, discord, etc., how can that be good? How can that be light? Well, new ideas pop up and disrupt old ones. They, halfway through the journey here in the 5, the new plans shake up old things. um Another thing that happens when disruption happens is that we learn to work with constraints, or we redraft, or we go back to the drawing board. But it can also be negative, unexpected roadblocks, frustration, discord, etc. So disruption can be positive, and it could be negative. In the suit of water, the cups. How can disruption of stability be good? Shaking things up, making a relationship exciting and fresh, bringing new energy, or unhealthy conflict. The concept is the same. It's disruption, but there's a positive disruption or a negative, a light or a shadow. Brainstorms for swords, sudden realizations, epiphanies, revolutionary new ideas, or argumentative approaches, impolitic approaches, undiplomatic approaches. You know what I mean? So a disruption of thought can be really exciting and can create realizations, or it can make us undiplomatic. It can make us into a bully. It can make us argumentative, unprepared, etc. So what I did again was I went through all. This took way longer than I thought it was going to. I thought, oh, this will be easy, but actually, having done it, I'm glad I did, because um, What I don't think I'll do is like memorize this. I can't see myself sitting here and saying, okay, this is one, and then I'm going to memorize each, because that's sort of the opposite of um intuition, I guess. But what I am intent on doing, I think, is in the study, is trying as much as possible to not necessarily explore what I wrote here over and over again so that I memorize it, but to return to the idea of taking the energy of the number and filtering it through each suit, and in a light and shadow way. And so what in a way what gets memorized or studied is the distillation, is the energy of the number. What you practice, right, and what I hope to practice is doing this. So like this was the initial impulse of like using the number and the suit as a filter, filtering the number through the suit in the polarity of light and shadow. This is what I need to learn or memorize. This is really just like the initial phase of referencing through. Um, but in essence, if what I may do, is come back and like do another sheet, and copy this over and leave all this blank and do it again, as a way of thinking, okay, after a few days, like, um, what does one in shadow fire really mean to me? Um, as a way of kind of developing an intuitive but still prepared approach, um, to working with the numbers, rather than memorizing meanings. How do I filter the number through the lens of the suit and the polarities? So That is how I've sort of moved into the next phase of working through um tarot numerology. And this I mean, this is something you can sort of take and do. I guess I could post this. I haven't really proofread it or whatnot, but I can post it if anyone wants it, if you want to reference it. But what I think is more important than reading through what I did is actually maybe kind of taking a similar path and going through and looking at some resources you really appreciate, and then trying to distill them, and then taking the distillation that you come up with and filtering it through the suits, and then the polarities of light and shadow. So that is that's my next step, and then or that was my next step, and then the next step is really to start practicing and that's more important than anything else, right? Is practice. I've talked about this a little bit in my other videos, that um, practice is important. Um, my background partly is in adult learning for corporate training, and practice is more important than anything else. So like this is your prep. This is the lesson that you know you're going in. This is your like your textbook, but now you have to take the textbook and practice it, make it practical. And so um, that's what I'm gonna start working on. So and then hopefully this is a good, you know, useful um, thing that you know helps anyone who's interested in learning this kind of come up with a plan of attack for for learning the numerology and how it filters through. I the one thing I kind of wish I hadn't used Excel to do this, because it's really hard to make this printable. I wish I could actually print this, and I've made it so I've like kind of forced it to print on 11 by 17, but I don't think my printer actually handles 11 by 17, so I'll have to take this somewhere and do it. I would probably, if I were going to do this again, do it in Word or PowerPoint. That way I could kind of control what shows up where, and I could um, print it more easily on 8.5 by 11 paper. But anywho, so that is my next phase of learning the number system for the minors in tarot. And again, I hope this is helpful, and I hope that you will share with me how you're doing it if you're working through this. So be well, have a great week, and I'll talk to you soon.